During the day, a busy workplace provides a natural sense of security. Hundreds of people moving through shared spaces create a collective awareness that keeps us feeling safe. But when the sun goes down and the crowds leave, that exact same building becomes a massive, hollow shell. Psychologists often refer to this daytime safety net as a form of herd immunity. When you are surrounded by coworkers, the volume of eyes constantly scanning the environment suppresses the feeling of paranoia. It acts as an active deterrent to anyone or anything with bad intentions. Take away that crowd, and you create a massive vacuum of security. Long, empty hallways and silent break rooms transform into a series of unmonitored blind spots. In this environment, you are a very small target in a very large, unprotected arena. To understand exactly how vulnerable a person becomes in that vacuum, we can examine 3 accounts from the graveyard shift. These stories map out the shrinking distance between a worker and the potential threat. We can measure this threat level using a framework called the escalation of proximity. It tracks how danger intensifies as the physical distance between a lone worker and an outside threat begins collapsing inward. Working these hours require functioning in environments where standard daytime boundaries of safety cease to exist. Surviving the night shift is a test of navigating that exact exposure. The first account comes from a security guard patrolling a sprawling corporate complex. At 2:30 in the morning, the baseline expectation is total, uninterrupted isolation. There is no one to talk to and no one to interrupt the silence. To maintain control over thousands of square feet of empty space, guards rely on closed-circuit cameras. These screens act as extended senses, allowing a single person to monitor a massive perimeter from the safety of a locked office. Pacing quickens slightly. But on this particular night, the silence broke. The guard heard distinct footsteps echoing down from the 3rd floor. Scanning the monitors, he noticed a single office door slowly opening entirely on its own. He grabbed his flashlight and walked upstairs to physically investigate. The hallway appeared empty, though the office door now stood wide open. Stepping inside the dark room, the guard heard a distinct whisper directly behind his ear. He spun around but found nothing. It wasn't until the next morning, when he reviewed the security footage, that he saw the truth. The camera clearly showed him walking into the room, followed immediately by something else walking in right behind him. Unseen proximity creates a specific type of horror, the discovery that a threat was physically present long before it was ever detected on a screen. The guard believed his technology maintained his safety, unaware that the physical gap had already been compromised. Moving from a sprawling complex to a highly contained space, our second case involves a lone worker in a small 24-hour call center at 3 a.m. It's a claustrophobic environment where late-night calls are exceedingly rare. The silence was interrupted by an incoming call with no caller ID. Answering the line, the worker heard only heavy breathing. After asking for a name, a voice on the other end simply whispered, "Why are you still there?" The worker hung up immediately. In that brief moment, the psychological defense is to assume the threat is distant. A voice on a phone implies miles of separation, buffered by locked exterior doors and digital networks. Then, the phone rang again. Same number. The worker ignored it, but quickly realized the ringing wasn't just echoing from the receiver. The sound was originating from another desk, sitting in the shadows of the exact same room. The stalker was already inside. This represents the total collapse of the safe zone. Thick walls and locked doors offer no protection when a predator bypasses the exterior perimeter and utilizes the building's own internal systems to hunt. Our final case study removes the remaining barriers entirely. At 1 a.m., a gas station attendant sat alone in an outpost on the desolate outskirts of town. The building was essentially a glass box, brilliantly illuminated against miles of pitch-black road. A lone car pulled up. Instead of entering, the driver stepped out and stood motionless, staring directly at the attendant through the glass. After several minutes, he walked inside, silently paced the aisles, stopped near the register, and said, "You shouldn't be here tonight." He then returned to his car and drove away into the dark. 10 minutes later, the station's main power grid completely failed. The lights, the cameras, and the registers all went dead. The worker was instantly stripped of their final layer of environmental security. Out in the total darkness, a pair of headlights flicked back on. The car had returned. But this time, the driver didn't approach the glass. He simply parked at the edge of the lot, idling, actively watching the trapped worker sitting in the dark. The worker barricaded the back room and called the police. By the time officers arrived, the lot was empty.
But they confirmed the terrifying detail. That exact vehicle matched multiple reports of a stalker who specifically hunted night shift employees working in isolation. This scenario leaves no buffer. There are no cameras to check and no internal networks to hide behind. It is a state of zero distance, leaving the worker in pure physical exposure to a real-world predator. The escalation moved from the digital delay of a security monitor to the internal breach of a phone line, ending with the direct physical exposure of the gas station lot. This progression demonstrates how night shift isolation systematically dismantles the environmental protections we take for granted. Physical barriers and digital monitors fail as soon as the proximity collapses. To clock in for the graveyard shift, workers have to constantly suppress their natural survival instincts. They must ignore the shadows, dismiss the strange noises, and convince themselves that the empty spaces around them are secure, even when the environment suggests otherwise. Ultimately, the true danger of the night shift is not the dark itself. The danger is the absolute isolation it enforces, placing ordinary people in extraordinary states of vulnerability. If you enjoyed these accounts and want to explore more stories of those who work while the rest of the world sleeps, make sure to subscribe and let me know if you want a part 2. And remember, some nights are better left alone. A bustling office or a brightly lit store feels inherently safe during the day, but after dark, that exact same space changes. The hum of conversation is gone, replaced by dead silence and empty corridors. Psychologists attribute our daytime comfort to environmental predictability. We rely on the crowd, co-workers, managers, customers, to create a shield of social safety. But when the clock strikes 10 p.m. and the day shift clocks out, that shield evaporates. The ambient noise disappears. Your senses heighten. Every hum of the air conditioner, every creaking pipe, suddenly demands your attention. It forces a difficult question. What happens to a human brain when it is tasked with guarding a sprawling, empty fortress entirely alone? When the social layer is removed, the architecture itself changes. The very walls that protected you during the day now only serve to hide you from the outside world. Consider a security guard working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift in a massive corporate high-rise. For hours, his only company is a wall of security monitors. At 2:30 a.m., he hears heavy footsteps echoing from the 3rd floor, a zone completely off-limits at night. He checks the cameras. At first glance, everything is perfectly still. But then, on one of the feeds, a heavy office door begins to swing open entirely on its own. Grabbing his flashlight, he heads upstairs to investigate. The hallway is empty. The door stands wide open. As he steps inside to sweep the room, a clear, sharp whisper speaks directly into his ear from right behind him. He spins around. There is no one there. He survives the shift, but the incident gnaws at him. The next morning, he pulls the archive tape to verify exactly what happened in that room. The footage captures him walking into the office with his flashlight, but right on his heels, stepping into the room directly behind him, is something else. He quit the job that exact day. We tend to think of surveillance cameras as active protection. In reality, they offer zero physical defense. They only provide retrospective proof that your perimeter was already compromised. That perimeter shrinks even further in a smaller locked environment, like a 24-hour call center at 3 a.m. The threat bypasses exterior floors entirely and targets the worker's immediate space. Here, a solitary worker experienced a proximity breach. Her console rang with no caller ID.
When she answered, there was no voice on the other end, only the rhythmic sound of heavy breathing. She asked who was there. After a long pause, a harsh voice whispered, "Why are you still there?" A chill set in. She slammed the phone down. Seconds later, the console lit up again, the exact same unlisted number. This time, she refused to pick up. As she sat there in the silence, she realized the ringing was not coming from an outside line. It was audibly echoing from another empty desk, 10 feet away, inside the locked office. Physical barriers like locked front doors create an illusion of safety. They mean absolutely nothing when the entity stalking you is already inside the room. The most extreme spatial violation happens during a total environmental collapse. Picture a lone attendant working a brightly lit gas station on the outskirts of town at 1 a.m. A car pulls up, but the driver stays outside. He stands by the pumps, staring intently through the glass for a full minute. Eventually, he walks in, wandering the aisles in complete silence. He approaches the counter, looks the attendant dead in the eye, and delivers a flat, unprompted warning. "You shouldn't be here tonight." He walks out, gets into his car, and drives off into the dark. The attendant tries to brush it off. 10 minutes pass. Then, without warning, the entire power grid fails. The neon signs, the canopy lights, the registers, everything dies, plunging the station into total darkness. Out in the pitch black, a pair of headlights creeps back into the lot. It's the same car. The driver doesn't get out. He just sits in the dark, watching. The attendant locks herself in the back room and calls the police. By the time they arrive, the car is gone. The officers reveal a chilling detail. They had been tracking that exact vehicle. It belonged to a predator known for hunting isolated night shift workers. When the power fails, the final boundary between the worker and the dark vanishes. Without light to mark the property line, the station is no longer a separate secure zone. It's just another part of the woods. These experiences map the collapse of our safety perimeters, from digital cameras to physical walls. We assume safety is built into the concrete of our workplaces. In truth, it relies almost entirely on the collective presence of a crowd. During the day, an office or a store is a functional, thriving ecosystem. But once the sun sets and the people leave, the building becomes an empty, fragile shell, offering zero real protection to the solitary occupant inside. It leaves us with a stark warning. Some nights and some quiet, empty spaces are simply better left alone. What is the darkest, emptiest space you've ever had to work in? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed these stories, and tell me if you want a part 2. Think of a food court or an office lobby at noon. It's packed, loud, and inherently safe due to the sheer volume of people. But visit that exact same coordinate at 3 a.m., and the atmosphere completely inverts. We build massive spaces specifically to house crowds. When you strip the population away, the architecture becomes a vacuum. It's a shell designed for thousands, now inhabited by one. The people who staff the graveyard shift exist inside this vacuum. They operate outside the standard societal safety net, the witnesses, co-workers, and bystanders who provide a subconscious layer of security during the day. Without that human presence, our usual sense of security dissolves. It breaks down across 3 specific layers: the physical environment, our technological connections, and our basic exposure to the outside world. This breakdown often begins with the most basic assumption of the night shift, that you are safe because you are inside a locked room. When the sun goes down, the systems we rely on to define a space as safe begin to experience a total collapse. In a modern commercial office building at 2:30 a.m., the security protocols are absolute. The doors are deadbolted, the alarms are active, and the space is a sealed box. For a lone guard on patrol, hearing heavy footsteps on the 3rd floor doesn't just signal an intruder, it signals a failure of the building's primary function to remain empty. When the security guard checked the camera monitors, the environment was acting independently. He watched a heavy office door, one requiring a physical handle to turn, slowly swing open into the dark. He went upstairs to investigate. The hallway was vacant, and the door was wide open. He stepped into the room, only to hear a whisper directly behind his head. He was alone when he turned around, but the morning footage revealed a different reality. The camera captured the guard entering the room, and then it captured something else following him in, inches from his back. When a secure space begins to violate its own physical rules, the worker's baseline reality disappears. The walls and locks that were supposed to provide safety become the boundaries of a trap. In a 24-hour call center at 3 a.m., the desk phone is the only bridge to the rest of the living world. It is the worker's sole lifeline. One night, a call came through with no ID. The worker answered to hear nothing but heavy, rhythmic breathing, followed by a low voice asking, "Why are you still there?" The instinct in that moment is to hang up, to use the technology to sever the threat and reclaim the silence of the office. But the phone rang again instantly. Same number. This time, the worker didn't pick up. They didn't need to, because they realized the ringing wasn't coming from the external network. The sound was coming from a desk 20 feet away. A phone in an empty cubicle was dialing the only other person in the building. This is where the isolation becomes claustrophobic. The tools designed to connect us to safety are the very things that bring the threat directly into our immediate space. On the outskirts of town, an isolated gas station at 1 a.m. represents the most vulnerable point of the night shift, physical exposure at the edge of the map. A car pulled up, but the driver stayed outside. He stood perfectly still, watching the lone clerk through the glass for a full minute before moving. When he finally entered, he ignored the shelves. He walked directly to the counter and told the clerk, "You shouldn't be here tonight." Then he left. 10 minutes later, the station's power was cut. The bright lights that usually act as a deterrent vanished, leaving the building in total darkness. Through the window, the clerk saw the same headlights return. The car sat in the dark, watching. When the police eventually arrived, the car fled, and the officers revealed that this specific vehicle had been stalking night workers across the county for weeks. This goes beyond the psychological. Without the herd immunity provided by the daylight crowds, the night shift leaves a worker completely exposed to anyone watching from the shadows. These experiences share a common thread: the total failure of the systems we assume will protect us. Walls are bypassed, lifelines are subverted, and light is extinguished. The isolation of the shift acts as a catalyst. It takes the normal safeguards of a commercial space and peels them away one by one until nothing is left between the worker and the unknown. When you see a lit window in an empty office tower or a lone clerk at a late-night station, you're looking at someone standing in a space where the rules of safety have changed. If you want to see a part 2 investigating these late-night anomalies, subscribe and let us know in the comments. There are certain hours of the night where even the most familiar places are best left empty.
Right now, nearly 20 million people are working while the rest of the world sleeps. They sit alone at front desks, patrol empty corridors, and stock shelves in massive, silent buildings. These enormous concrete structures were engineered to hold hundreds of loud, bustling humans during the daytime. When you strip that population away and leave just one person inside, the architecture itself starts to feel heavy. Psychologists call these environments liminal spaces. Think of deserted office lobbies or fluorescent-lit hallways at 3 a.m. Without their daytime purpose, these transit zones trigger a deep instinctual unease. The human brain struggles to process an empty void that was designed to be full. To cope, a lone worker relies on the hum of the air conditioner and the glare of the overhead lights to maintain an artificial sense of security. For some, that sense of a presence in the dark marks the moment where the architectural illusion of safety finally breaks. Take a sprawling corporate office building at night. It is a labyrinth of identical hallways, cubicle grids, and closed doors that stretch on for acres. A security guard working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift heard footsteps echoing from the completely restricted third floor. After checking the empty hallway with his flashlight, he found an office door slowly opening, followed by a whisper directly behind his ear. This diagram shows the paradox of security cameras. While green sightlines suggest total control,
they actually reveal massive, interconnected blind spots. On the footage, as the guard entered the third-floor office, a second figure stepped out of a blind spot right behind him. The terror built into a labyrinth is the vulnerability of an unknown perimeter. The sheer volume of empty space allows a threat to stay perfectly camouflaged in the void, right up until the moment it's breathing on your neck. Contrast that sprawling labyrinth with the severe claustrophobia of a desk job. At 3 a.m., inside a small 24-hour call center, there is nowhere to patrol and usually no one else around. One operator was sitting through a dead shift when a call came in with no caller ID. She answered, only to hear heavy breathing on the other end, followed by a voice whispering, "Why are you still there?" In a confined role like this, you are physically trapped at your workstation. Your headset and your telephone are your only lifelines to the outside, waking world. She hung up immediately. Seconds later, the phone rang again, but as she let it ring, she noticed the sound echoing in the room with her. The call wasn't coming from outside the building. It was coming from another desk inside that supposedly empty office. This is the breach of the inner perimeter. The psychological damage here happens because the isolation you thought was protecting you has already been completely compromised. If we move out to the absolute fringes of society, the architecture of isolation changes again. An overnight attendant at a roadside gas station is miles away from help, surrounded entirely by pitch-black wilderness. Around 1 a.m., a man pulled up, but instead of coming inside, he stood outside the glass and stared. When he finally walked through the doors, he didn't buy anything. He just looked at the attendant and said, "You shouldn't be here tonight," before driving away. 10 minutes later, the station's power was completely cut. In the absolute dark, headlights slowly swept across the parking lot. The man had returned, and this time he parked his car and sat in the pitch black, watching the building. The attendant locked himself in a back room and called the police. When the officers arrived, the car was gone, but they confirmed that the specific vehicle had already been reported multiple times for stalking solitary night workers in the area. This diagram shows the fishbowl effect. Inside a brightly lit glass box, your vision stops directly at the window pane. For anyone standing outside, their sightlines pass straight through the glass, giving them total visibility while they remain hidden in the dark. It is the ultimate physical trap. Whether it is a cavernous labyrinth, a confined inner sanctum, or a glass-walled fishbowl, these environments were never designed for a single occupant. They act as beautifully engineered traps. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans survived the night by sleeping in groups. The modern night shift strips away the biological safety net of the herd, exposing our most primal fear of isolation. We use heavy glass panes, electronic security badges, and humming fluorescent lights to convince ourselves we are secure. But that architecture only masks how exposed we truly are. So the next time you take a late-night drive and see a solitary attendant standing under the glow of a canopy, consider the immense weight of isolation they carry for 8 hours straight. Because out there on the fringe, some nights are simply better left alone. If these accounts changed how you look at the night shift, subscribe and let us know in the comments if you want to see a part 2.